I would define nonfiction filmmaking as a journey that we take with our participants, or in the case of Night and Fog, with locations and with memory and with hypothetical feelings of people who've been murdered, and with archive footage. But it's a journey we take with our participants, where we push everybody, including, if it's an honest film, the filmmaker and the audience, beyond their comfort zone. It's a series of occasions that we create together collaboratively via the intervention of filmmaking, where everybody is pushed beyond their comfort zone. And in order to make visible the forces, the problems that the film is trying to explore. If you're pushing people beyond their comfort zone, exploring the most important issues at play, you will be transforming them, and you'll be transforming yourself through the journey. And in classical kind of dramaturgy, in dramatic structure, your story always is what's changing the characters. If people are changing, that's the story. So my films are reflexive because they don't try to hide the process, namely the filmmaking process, which is changing the characters and changing me while making the film. It doesn't mean that I'm, in my films, telling the story of how they're made the way I might recount it in an interview. But it means that the camera is always looking back at itself, at the filmmaking process. I think that in a way, Night and Fog is also reflexive, because it's constantly asking these questions about how we look at these things, how we remember these things. What right do we have to remember some of it, even as we must try to remember? What right do we have to imagine the unimaginable? We see this almost endless room, the way it's shot. It looks like it's actually a landscape that goes to the horizon of human hair, of women's hair. We then see it's made into cloth, and we see these rolls of felt, and the way it's backlit, or the way there's a kicker, some light from behind, we actually see strands of human hair coming off the cloth. And it's recognizably human hair. It doesn't look like the strands of sheep hair that come off of a piece of felt made from wool, or cotton fibers off of cotton felt. It's recognizably human hair. And because he doesn't draw attention to it, there's no information about what this fabric was used for, we're suddenly left to imagine whether there is somewhere in our house an object where this fabric's been used, where if we just look closely, we might see a strand of hair. And these are the questions that haunt the film. Where are we in our blindness, in the fact that where are we in this because we don't know if there's cloth in our house made from human hair? Where are we in this because we don't know the conditions in which every article of clothing touching our body is made, even as we read in the newspaper about sweatshops in Bangladesh or elsewhere collapsing and killing hundreds of people? Where are we in this?
Alors le monde véritable, celui des paysages calmes, celui du temps d'avant, peut bien apparaître au loin, pas si loin. Pour le déporter, c'était une image.
René really invites us into his film in a few different ways. First of all, in the dissonance, temporal dissonance, this moving back and forth between the past and the present, between the archive footage, which obviously is the past, and then these tracking shots that are impatient but also somehow exploratory. It's almost a paradox that we're sort of being moved through these spaces and asked to see and explore them, but with this sense of real urgency. And in the contrast between those two temporalities, I think we imagine how the present is always haunted by the past, that these often banal-looking spaces where he's training his camera become crime scenes in very disturbing ways, not just because the crimes are disturbing, but because there's mystery around the crimes. We're not told exactly where we are. We're not told how many people were killed in a particular location, in a particular gas chamber. Also, I think the voiceover's questioning. It's asking, what would it be like to be a prisoner here? What would it be? Imagine yourself as somebody in this situation. And then it's also pointing always at the limitations of imagination. We can't imagine what went on here, which is an invitation, of course, for us to try to imagine and feel the limits of what's imaginable.
Cette réalité des camps méprisée par ceux qui la fabriquent, insaisissable pour ceux qui la subissent, c'est bien en vain qu'à notre tour nous essayons d'en découvrir les restes.
I understand that Renee asked for a dispassionate, sort of objective reading, neutral reading of the voiceover, but I think that Michel Bouquet's actual reading feels urgent. It feels impassioned, and it actually, more than though, maybe if I'm able to be more precise, it feels outraged.
Voilà tout ce qui nous reste pour imaginer cette nuit coupée d'appels, de contrôle de pouls, nuit qui claque des dents. Il faut dormir vite.
There's a note of moral outrage that is unmistakable for me. And in the rhetorical questions, we won't even imagine. We won't, there's no words for this. When in fact there might be. That's actually a kind of rhetorical moral judgment, and I think it's appropriate.
Inutile de décrire ce qui se passait dans ces cachots. Ces cages calculées pour qu'on ne puisse tenir ni debout ni couché, des hommes, des femmes y furent suppliciés consciencieusement pendant des jours.
Now, interestingly, it's not asking some questions. A documentary that's driven by text, we might expect that we're going to get all sorts of information. There's certain things that it doesn't tell us. We see a hospital where they're conducting medical experiments on prisoners. We don't know where it is. We see a hospital where prisoners are dying or just being killed through a kind of euthanasia program because they're sick, or they're just being killed to free up beds or whatever. We don't know where it is. We see archive footage that suggests the Nazis were extraordinarily comprehensive in what they filmed. It raises this enormous question, why did they film this? Now, the clues to the answers to those questions would lie in who filmed it, for what purpose, where it was filmed, what camp was it, what project was the filming a part of, what project was the camp a part of. The things that the film doesn't ask create questions that haunt the film almost as powerfully as those that are asked explicitly. And I think this maybe is a crucial feature of all essay film that is truly successful. And all nonfiction film that's successful, that there's things you address explicitly, and there's questions that you let hang, and that you allow the audience to contemplate by deliberately avoiding them. Every, in a sense, any scene that you set explicitly has its constitutive obscene, the thing which is unspeakable, unimaginable, and indeed asking about what the motivation of the Nazis in filming things would have been obscene, both literally or etymologically, in the sense that beyond beyond the boundary of the frame of this film, but also ethically in the sense that it would somehow be obscene to question or to think about the motivation of the Nazis in great detail while we're trying to imagine what is it like to be a prisoner. But the fact that those questions are rendered obscene by his choice of focus doesn't make them any less present. In a sense, it makes them deeper. They become the bedrock of the film.
Ces images sont prises quelques instants avant une extermination.
If you compare this, for example, to Shoah, which is maybe the other key documentary about the Holocaust, that's 9.5 hours long. This is half an hour long. And there's not the long silences that you have in Landsman's work, and there's not the silences that I've worked with in The Look of Silence, or indeed in the director's cut of my first film, The Act of Killing, where the silence is a kind of space for the dead. I think because the film, instead of making space for the dead to speak, is asking you to imagine what it's like to live in the camp. And there's a breathlessness and terror to that experience. It's disorienting, it's jarring. You imagine being woken up by the dawn reveille, being forced at gunpoint to march hurriedly to work at a factory as a slave, being rushed home, and hopefully you don't die along the way. I think we're kind of rushed through the film in a way that's almost analogous to the experience of living in this killing machine that he's asking us to imagine.
Rien ne distinguait la chambre à gaz d'un bloc ordinaire. À l'intérieur, une salle de douche fausse accueillait les nouveaux venus.
I also think that the score plays a crucial role here, because there's a really jarring almost and very powerful dissonance between the score and the images. There's a moment where we have this very beautiful almost touching music, almost romantic music over images of over archive footage of corpses. And the score for me in that moment becomes almost sarcastic. It elevates, the corpses somehow become beautiful, and I resist that, and I realize that they're bearable because of the sentimentality, and inherent in that is this indictment of sentimentality itself. I start asking, what am I doing when I'm consuming images of tragedy? What am I doing when I sentimentalize tragedy? How is sentimentality always a form of escapism? And I think that, of course, brings me into the film and leads me to contemplate, because self-questioning, whenever you're aware of yourself in a film, you're questioning.
Une drôle d'herbe a poussé et recouvert la terre usée par le piétinement des concentrationnaires. Le courant ne passe plus dans les fils électriques, plus aucun pas que le nôtre.
I think René was trying to explore the Holocaust as a way of sounding a universal moral warning. That's what he's doing at the end of the film when he says, humanity's cry is all around us, but we're not listening now. And I think that, and he's particularly sensitive that that the Holocaust and many other atrocities have been justified through racism. So he deliberately avoids any kind of racial categories in discussing what happens. He talks about Nazis and he talks about prisoners, acknowledging that there were more than just Jews among the prisoners, and there were more than just Germans among the Nazis. In fact, he faced he faced real censorship over one shot where you can identify one of the Nazi soldiers as a French soldier from his cap. And because this would be obvious to any French viewer watching the film, he was told he had to obscure that shot or lose the whole last 10 minutes of the movie. And of course, faced with that dilemma, he obscured the shot. Now that's been restored, the original shot. But he's saying, we have done this. This has happened all across Europe, and similar. And we are, as France, I think, in this evoking of the war in Algeria, we're doing this now in Africa, and this is something that human beings do to each other. And I'm going to resist the language and the categories that have been used to justify this crime.
Qui de nous veille de cet étrange observatoire pour nous avertir de l'avenue des nouveaux bourreaux? Ont-ils vraiment un autre visage que le nôtre? Quelque part parmi nous, il reste des capots chanceux, des chefs récupérés, des dénonciateurs inconnus. Il y a tous ceux qui n'y croyaient pas, ou seulement de temps en temps.
I think that the making of the film is itself an act of hope, and there's an urgent sense of warning, which you could say is also implies a kind of bleak view of the moment in which the film's made. Not only does he suggest that criminals are still among us, it's only 10 years on, they would be among us living their lives, they could be your baker, your neighbor, your boss. But he also suggests that this kind of violence is happening all around us. He asks us to open our ears to the ongoing, ever-present cry of humanity. And he is, I think, evoking the French war in Algeria. I think he's evoking the fascism in a way that was exported from Europe to the global south in the establishing of the post-war order and the coalescing of the East-West conflict in the Cold War. I think that there's an agony over the present, but to sound a warning is always an act of hope, because it implies a hope that if people will heed the warning, things might change.
Il y a nous qui regardons sincèrement ces ruines, comme si le vieux monstre concentrationnaire était mort sous les décombres, qui feignons de reprendre espoir devant cette image qui s'éloigne, comme si on guérissait de la peste concentrationnaire. Nous qui feignons de croire que tout cela est d'un seul temps et d'un seul pays, et qui ne pensons pas à regarder autour de nous, et qui n'entendons pas qu'on crie sans fin.